Today on ADAM Off-Road, we're going to be upgrading the rear bumper on this 2015 Jeep Wrangler JK. Let's get to work. So before we begin the installation process of the new bumper, we're going to have to remove quite a bit of parts off the rear end of the Jeep. We're going to start by removing the rear spare tire and then the spare tire carrier that's attached to the rear tailgate. Now in order to do that, we're going to have to move this plastic component, disconnect the electrical connector, and then we'll be able to locate the 8 bolts securing the stock mount up to the tailgate. And then you should be able to pull the rubber grommet out of the tailgate, and then at that moment everything will come out one whole enchilada. So once you have that part out, there's going to be a plastic vent cover that's attached to the square hole. Go ahead and work that off with your fingers. It's pretty simple to come off. And then there's also a rubber grommet. You're going to want to take that off too. So as you can see, a lot of dirt and dust has been collecting up onto the tailgate over the past years, and we're going to clean that before we get any new parts back on. Now I'm going to take some of this buffing compound on my drill, and I'm just going to buff all of this up real nice and clean, get that paint back and make it shine again. Since I've already had the spare tire carrier off, I decided I was going to install a rear view camera. This was a perfect time because I had already had everything off necessary to feed all the wires through and up to the spare tire, which I have it already mounted, as you can see right here. So moving along in the process, there's going to be several different kits in the kit for the whole assembly of the bumper. You're going to locate the one with the plate, and it has 2 turnbuckles, there's a bushing and a few other parts and nuts and bolts. That's the kit we're going to find. You're going to install the rubber bushing onto the center of the plate and go ahead and take the original 8 bolts that we used when we pulled off of the stock tire carrier mount. We're going to go ahead and use those same bolts to install the metal plate up onto the rear of the tailgate. So now that that plate is installed on the tailgate, we're going to come back and revisit this later on in the video. Right now we're going to remove the rear bumper. The bumper was fairly simple to take off. There's 2 bolts on the driver's side and there's 2 bolts on the passenger side. I just use a 15mm socket, loosen them up and remove the bolts. There's also 2 bolts in the center by the hitch. I use a 15mm open end wrench because it's kind of tight right there by the exhaust muffler, and then went ahead and just removed those. Now on the top there's also 2 bolts, this one here and this one here. These are like 90-degree brackets. Just go ahead and loosen those up and turn the brackets out and you'll be able to remove the bumper just like this. This allowed me to gain access to the rear recovery hook. There was 3 bolts. I removed those with an 18mm socket. Once that was removed, I went ahead and moved on to the rear hitch. There's going to be 4 long bolts. I'm going to remove those and set everything aside. I also had to remove the 2 screws attaching the electrical bracket for the trailer harness. That had to be also relocated, so this would be a good time to remove that right now and just set it off to the side. Overall, checking over the build quality of the bumper, I was quite impressed, and I wasn't really expecting a lot of the materials to be heavy duty. Most of this is 3/16 and 10 gauge steel. There was a lot of extra thought into bracing up the spindle and adding the tail lights, as well as bracing up the rear hitch mount. I like how they supply the D-rings, the lights, and the overall quality of the textured paint looks good as well. For being a budget style bumper, this looks really good. So here I've laid out all the components and the pieces to install the bumper. There's going to be some brackets, some hardware, some washers, nuts. They're all laid out. We're going to go ahead and get this bumper installed right now. To bolt up the bumper, we'll start by inserting these brackets into the frame. You'll have 2, one on the driver's side and one on the passenger side. Then I took the plate with the 4 holes, 4 bolts, 4 washers, and set them in the frame just like this. I thought this was cool. Hooke Road took a little bit of extra time and thought about the installer. They built the brackets more into a channeling design. That way you can install the bumper with ease and not have to hold the bumper while someone bolts it down. This made setting the bumper up to the frame super easy, and I didn't have to have anyone help me install it. Once I had the bumper up to the frame, I just double checked that all 4 through bolts for the hitch were in, and I just went ahead and started installing the bolts, washers, and lock washers to both sides of the frame. So once all 4 bolts are on the ends, go ahead and start putting the washers, lock washers, and nuts on the 4 long bolts in the center. We'll go ahead and tighten up those first, and then we'll move back to the outside and get all of those bolts tightened up. So this is going to be totally optional. As you can see, I've added a 3rd bolt on each end of the bumper. You will not find these extra bolts in the packaging, and if you do end up putting these bolts here, you will come up short at the end of the project. I had some extra hardware laying around, and any way I can make things more secure, I'll try to do that. The torque specs on these are going to be around 60 foot-pounds. I'm just buzzing them on with my impact driver. So right now is the perfect time to go ahead and remount your bracketry if you have one. I just ended up drilling two 3/32 holes and using the same hardware to mount to the bumper here. If you wanted to, you can probably get away with using a self-tapping screws, couple self-tapping screws, and that should be plenty of screw to secure the bracket to the bumper. So there we have it. The bumper is secured to the frame. Now we're going to move to the next part, which is the swing out tire carrier. There's going to be some parts like this, as you see laid out. I've got two plates, some nuts, bolts, and washers. This is going to be the setup for the hard stop on the center of the tire carrier. You'll see the hard stop here. It looks like a mushroom head. It's got the long threaded bolt, and this is how I have it all assembled. Don't tighten anything up, just leave everything loose. We'll come back and revisit this. So the next part of installing the tire carrier is going to be setting up the bearings on the spindle side of things. There's going to be two bearings in the packages, one smaller one larger one. We're going to install the larger one first. Make sure you have some grease on hand. There's going to be an outer race and an inner bearing for each bearing setup. You'll see some hardware like a castellated nut, washers, and things like that. Go ahead and take the outer race for the larger bearing, tap it in with a rubber mallet. You can add some grease around the outer side to help ease it in, and get a chisel if you need to kind of tap it into the back of the shoulder. Make sure it seats all the way in the back. So you're going to duplicate this same setup for the smaller bearing up on the top side of the tubing. That's going to be the opposite side of the larger bearing. Go ahead and install the bearing into the spindle. Make sure it's well greased, and then we'll go ahead and add the tire carrier on top of that bearing. As you can see, I've already got the smaller bearing race already installed. Add that smaller bearing to the top, and that should center everything onto the spindle shaft. There was a castellated nut. I went ahead and threaded that down onto the spindle and used a large crescent wrench to tighten that down. Now, there's no torque spec on the castellated nut, but just don't be shy on tightening it up. You can tighten it up pretty good. You're just gonna wanna make sure that there's no back and forth movement on the tire carrier. Just make sure everything is nice and secure. So next we'll install the dust cap with this Allen cap screw. It just bolts on like this with an Allen wrench, and then we'll go ahead and check the movement of the tire carrier. If everything's good to go there, we'll move on to attaching the tire carrier to the rear tailgate of the Jeep. At this point, I'm just setting up the hard stop on the tire carrier to marry with the bushing on the back of the tailgate. You may have to adjust the hard stop threaded bolt in or out just to accommodate the positioning of where you want the hard stop on the bushings of the tailgate and the positioning of where you want the tire carrier to be when you totally close the tailgate. As you can see, it's way off. We'll have to move the hard stop and the plates just a bit to where they center up, and then we can go ahead and tighten everything down. So there's going to be quite a few adjustments at this point. You're just going to make sure that everything adjusts according to how you want everything closed and looking. Take your time here and make sure everything is adjusted properly. I'll talk a little bit about more tips and tricks on the setup later on in the video. Right here, I'm measuring the radius from the center of the wheel to the outside of the tire. This measurement is going to give us a ballpark area where we're going to place the mount for the spare tire. The idea is to have the mount bolted up so the tire doesn't touch the bumper. Here you see a series of holes where you can bolt the mount to fit up to a 37-inch tire. I'll be placing my mount here today. This will fit up to a 35-inch tire, no problem. Once I got the 4 bolts, lock washers, lock nuts, and nuts securing the mount to the tire carrier, there is some adjustability where there's 2 bolts that you can slide the mount in and out. This will accommodate the width of the wheel. To set up the mount for the width of the wheel, go ahead and put the wheel on. I like mine set up where the back of the tire is touching the tubing of the tire carrier. And before you take the wheel back off, just make sure that the back of the plate where the studs come out for the wheel to bolt onto is touching the inner face of the bolt pattern on the wheel. So once I found the best fitment for my spare tire, I just went ahead and locked these 2 bolts down and put my tire back on. And lastly, the kit comes with 3 lug nuts to secure your wheel to the spare tire carrier. Since I was already bolting things on, I went ahead and added the D-rings. That's pretty simple to install. I just used a screwdriver, slip it through the bolt pin of the D-ring, and tighten it up real nice and snug. So at this point, I had everything pretty much done other than adjusting these 2 turnbuckles attaching the Jeep's tailgate to the spare tire carrier. It's a pretty simple setup. Just pay close attention to how I have them configured, and we'll just go ahead and talk about how they're set up now. As you can see here, as the tailgate is opening up, you can see the separation of the hardstop and the bushing. So here we have two turnbuckles, one on the top and one on the bottom, and this is what's mechanically linking the tire carrier to the Jeep's tailgate. And this is the configuration that I have. You'll notice two notches right here, one on the top, one on the bottom. So as the tire carrier is opening and closing, these notches are going to provide clearance for the links to pass in and out. So the setup for this one on the top tire carrier side, I have the through bolt, and I also have a nut right here, and that will allow the eyelet to sit higher, more in the center of the notch. And then I just used the provided nut here at the bottom to lock it down. That's the nylock on the bottom. On the tailgate side, we just have the through bolt with the nylock on the bottom, and that secures the eyelets in position. Now for the bottom one, as you can see, I just have the through bolts here with the nylock and the through bolts here with the nylock. And these are the adjustments that I have. You want to match this adjustment the same with the top. That way everything is symmetrical and nothing is binding. Now just keep in mind that if you do not put the spacer here, this part of the turnbuckle will crash. As you can see, there's some paint missing right there. This part of the turnbuckle, the nut, will crash into the corner of the tire carrier side. So that's why I have this nut here jamming the bolt up higher in between this notch. And that's how it closes, guys. Pretty simple, easy install on the tire carrier, just a little bit of setup and everything. I'll turn you guys around and we'll talk about it. So what I really like about this bumper is that it takes the weight of the spare tire off of the tailgate hinges, and it's supporting now on the bumper. I really like that. It comes with the trailer hitch, some tail lights, more recovery points, and it just looks pretty awesome. If you're interested in this bumper, it's about $4.99 on the Hooke Road website. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the thumbs up button. Check out some of my other videos that may be helpful to you, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Have a good day. Peace out.